My view of how Stigma worked was much different when I was first coming out of the Marines as an enlisted guy than it is now. Nowadays, I'm like, Stigma, who cares? Like, I could care less what anybody thinks of me. If they think, he couldn't hack it or whatever. And not even just with combat Stigma, with a lot of things. I put a lot less focus on other people's perceptions of me than I do on my focus on overall happiness and enjoyment in life.
When a civilian enters any branch of the military, they go through a period of basic military training that's designed to change the way they think and act to turn them into a soldier, sailor, Marine, airman, or Coast Guardsman.
Hard work, hard work. Hard work, hard work. Hard work.
This is seen as an important time in the individual's life, critical for the proper transition from being someone not in the military to part of one of the greatest fighting forces on the planet.
Earn my pay. Hard work, do it every day. Get up out of 2:45.
After a period of time in the military, however, there's little done in any branch of the service to help that service member transition their mindset to life as a veteran.
Hard work, that's what they say. Hard work, I earn my pay.
As we often say here in the Change Your POV podcast network, after one leaves the military, they're never going to be a civilian again. And they're no longer a service member. They're this entirely different third thing, a veteran, with all the experiences, knowledge, strengths, and challenges that go along with that word.
Hard work, manifest. Hard work, you gotta do it right. Hard work.
One of the most overlooked aspects of transition is a service member's mental health and wellness. If the veteran has their heart, mind, body, and spirit in the right place, and has a support network of family and friends to rely upon, then they're most likely going to have a successful transition. If those things are not in place, things can get challenging.
Hard work, in the early morning rain. Hard work, that's what they say.
I'm your host, Dwayne France, and I'm going to take you through a veteran mental health boot camp to give you some advanced training for your brain.
Hard work, everybody on the plane. Hard work, sit 'em on down. Hard work.
These episodes will cover the many different aspects of veteran mental health that I, as both a combat veteran and a clinical mental health counselor, see, experience, and support veterans with daily.
Hard work, I earn my pay. Hard work, hard work.
I'm going to be joined by both veterans and mental health professionals talking about what you need to know about the stigma against seeking support, the different areas we need to understand, and provide some resources for when you think you might need them.
That's what I say. Hard work, earn my pay. Hard work, do it every day.
Get up in the morning and out of the rack, because this is some information that could very well save your life. Welcome to Veteran Mental Health Boot Camp.
Another day's of work. Hard work, that's what they say.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Headspace and Timing podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen again. Just the fact that you're trying to understand more about veteran mental health and that you're joining us and listening to these conversations means that you're in the fight against the stigma against veteran mental health. As you know, we're in this series. We've just started this series on veteran mental health beyond PTSD and TBI. That the concept is when we're talking about veteran mental health, yes, post-traumatic stress disorder and TBI are involved in the conversation, but that's not the whole conversation. So before we start getting into talking about PTSD, TBI, and the rest of these concepts that I introduced back in episode 25, I first wanted to talk about some of the impacts that keep a veteran talking about mental health. And so this episode, we're going to be talking about the internal stigma against seeking help. Next episode, we're going to be talking about the external stigma against seeking help. So this is going to kind of give you some groundwork on what keeps a veteran from getting to these places that they can talk about this stuff. So to do so, I've got a guest coming on the show today. A former Marine. I always like to say former Marine because there are no ex-Marines. Although there are some that will say they're ex-Marines and they got out in a bad way. So Marines that got out in a good way, or former Marine. So former Marine David Smith is joining me on the podcast today. So David, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Wayne.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I as we were talking before we went on, you and I have been having some conversations over some months, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come in and not just talk about Stigma, as we'll get to that, but your own personal journey regarding mental health and just military transition. So before we get into that, can you maybe tell the audience a little bit about yourself, your time in the military, and then your transition?
Yeah, so I served as a Marine Corps rifleman from 2003 to 2007. I was deployed twice for Operation Iraqi Freedom, one of them being somewhat difficult deployments in 2004 in particular, up in Najaf, Karballah, Diwania, Fallujah area, when things were nice and fun over that way. We participated in a lot of combat, and then, let's see, I deployed again in 2006, got out of the Marine Corps. I worked in Los Angeles for a short time doing kind of odd jobs while trying to figure out what on earth I wanted to do with my life after leaving the Marines. And then, of course, managed to land a job doing graveyard shift security for an oil company. Went to community college while working the graveyard shift for this oil company. So I didn't sleep a lot, but I got a lot done. Transferred up to UC Berkeley, graduated from UC Berkeley with my bachelor's in 2013, traveled around the world for about a year and change doing humanitarian missions and development projects. And then I moved to Norway in December of 2014 to be with the woman I love, who is now my wife. And now I work here in Norway for a very fun and interesting software startup that creates sales enablement solutions for companies. And I'm having a ton of fun out here doing stuff.
Yeah, no, I do have a little bit of jealousy. As you and I had talked when we first talked maybe several months ago, I'd spent some time in Trondheim when I was but stationed in Germany as a young soldier back in the mid-'90s. We did a 3-month exercise up in Norway and again right there around Trondheim. And so beautiful place. Always intend to come back and spend some vacation there and show the church to the kids and all that other stuff. So and even that, it's pretty interesting, your entire story and your journey, but that doesn't even really kind of dig the surface really of what we're talking about. Somebody will listen to that and say, well, that sounds like a guy that's pretty well adjusted and landed on its feet and he's doing well for himself. But and I guess the old Paul Harvey, there's more to the story, isn't there?
Yeah, of course there is. It's funny, when I first started telling people the full version of my story, which, by the way, wasn't until almost a decade of being out of the service, I would tell this to people and they'd be like, oh, I had no idea. And my only response was, well, yeah, you're not supposed to. You're not supposed to see all the part that sucks and that's hard. But I think that's part of the problem. Kind of in this age of digital social media and everything else, we want to pretend like life is perfect and bad things don't happen and we don't face personal problems and huge obstacles, but we do. And a lot of times the most important thing that you can do with your life is to share your struggles and share not only the inspirational, bright, shining pieces, but the parts where you stumbled and fell on your face and had a really difficult time and somehow managed to get through it, because a lot of times there's tons of people out there who need to hear that part of it.
Yeah, I think that brings to mind some people talking about maybe comparing your first chapter to somebody's 10th chapter, or the success that it takes to get there. In entrepreneurship, and this is very much more Eddie and Bennett's show, and maybe Kevin's, but that entrepreneurial journey, it takes years to become an overnight success. And people see that sort of that flash and that sizzle, but they don't realize the challenges that really gave you the strength to get through there. And then the other piece, a colleague of mine says that secrets are termites of the soul, right? And so we keep these things, and that sort of breeds maybe an imposter syndrome. if somebody says, David, you're doing so well, you're so great, in the back of your mind, you're like, yeah, but you don't know the real me, right? You don't know really what's going on behind. And that really drives a lot of the stigma. So it took you 10 years to really start talking about your mental health concerns or journey or anything like that. So maybe before we get into that, you want to talk a little bit about that, maybe the mental health stuff that you dealt with?
Yeah, I would say for me, dealing with mental health was perhaps more difficult in one particular way than it is for most people. Because, of course, mental health is difficult to address and deal with for anyone. But mine, part of what happened while I was in Iraq is that one night, trapped on the rooftop of a burning building and surrounded by insurgents, I fired down an alleyway at a group of targets that was running towards us, and one of them turned out to be a Marine, and I shot and injured a Marine who was a friend of mine. And so that particular part, it's one thing to talk about mental health and be like, yeah, we were hooking and jabbing and getting blown up and all this stuff, but nobody ever wants to tell that story like, I made a mistake and I hurt a Marine and it had a big impact. So that part of it was really difficult for me to start getting out there. And as you said, termites of the soul, right? When you keep stuff in there. I'm a huge believer, especially now, that when something's really bothering you, the best way to address it and get over it is to just talk about it with someone, anyone. And that can be mental health professionals, it can be a friend, it can be a mentor, it can be family, it can be anyone. But when we keep that stuff inside, it eats us up and it's never good.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. I mean, a lot of people, you're doing it in a very public way, right? And have gotten to be comfortable to say, this is actually what happened. And there is some shame and guilt there. I remember when you and I first talked several months ago, there was a couple things that you had said, and I brought it back when I interviewed Justin for our show here, was you said that it's easier to kick down doors than talking about kicking down doors, right? That my point was, there's a lot of action that veterans, that service members are able to do. We're able to we got our buddies stacked with us, and we have area cover and everything else, so we can kick down a door in Fallujah or Ramadi or Kabul, and we can do that without a whole bunch of hesitation. But then when it comes to actually getting through the door of a counselor, we avoid that, and there is a lot more avoidance going through the door that ultimately is going to be better for us. But you saying it is a lot easier to take action than talk about the action.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true, because being in combat is fun. It's a lot of that is fun, right? It gets the adrenaline pumping, and everyone wants to hear those stories. And you'll hear, you'll go to a bar, you'll go wherever, and if you find a veteran, you may get a war story or two, but what they're not going to tell you is, man, I was scared out of my mind kicking indoors sometimes. You don't know what's on the other side of that. Or even dismounting a vehicle, while we're in the middle of taking fire or whatever it happens to be. You'll get all the highlights, but you very, very, very rarely will meet people who tell you, it was terrifying. I watched someone near me who was shot and I didn't know what to do. I didn't have the medical skills. I froze. Whatever it happens to be. And that makes sense. Nobody wants to tell those stories. But they're really important to get out there. So yeah, of course, kicking down doors is much easier than talking about the real deep truth behind kicking down doors. Absolutely.
So what was it, and maybe what was the journey, maybe some of the things that you experienced after stopping kicking down doors? What were some of the challenges that you faced, and then what made you decide to maybe start talking about it?
I would say, at first coming home, nobody has a problem, right? So we were up in Iraq the first time around for about 9 months. And like I said, some really, really heavy combat. We had really close friends who were killed, injured, everything else. We took a lot of casualties and did a lot of fighting up there. And when we first came home, we didn't necessarily realize it ourselves. But when family or friends would be around us, they're like, "Ooh, you're a little rough around the edges." No, I'm not. That kind of thing. And I think over time it sort of evolved and took more shape. I found myself regularly doing things that I knew were absolutely ridiculous, but that were adrenaline behaviors that I enjoyed. I'd put down 6, 8, 12 beers and then go surfing at night using the headlights of my truck to find the waves. And I'd do it until, eventually the board would flip and I'd go down and smash my head on the ocean floor and maybe go slightly unconscious or whatever, and then finally say, yeah, okay, this is dumb, and then go back to the truck. But then again, I'd do it the following night or the following weekend or whatever. Same with mountain biking. I would do all these behaviors so aggressively and so dangerously that, of course, it was fun, but it didn't make any sense. I mean, nowadays, I still love to mountain bike. I love it. It's one of my releases. But I don't have it in me to do that kind of biking anymore, where I'm just literally almost trying to kill myself. And I think that's kind of the thing that I noticed is one was a whole lot of adrenaline seeking behavior. The other one was, of course, I didn't know how to explain it when I spoke with counselors, because I would go to a counselor's office and they'd be like, "Why are you here?" I'd be like, "I don't know. I just want to learn how to be less of an asshole." And they'd be like, "Well, yeah, but what does that mean?" I'd be like, "I don't know. I just feel like I'm an a-hole all the time and I want to fix it." And they'd be like, "Well, okay, right. So what can I do to help?" And I just flip out. I'm like, "I don't know. You tell me. You're the counselor. How am I supposed to tell you what to do to help me?"
Same conversation
so we'd go and
I had with a veteran one time. I was like, "Why are you here?" He's like, "I don't know. You're the therapist. Therapize me." He's like, "You do this for a living. I don't." And so, yeah, there is a lot of that.
Yeah, exactly. The other big problem that I faced is going to a lot of these counselors. I never had a counselor. I had some counselors who had been in the military for a short time or whatever, especially when I would go to vet centers or something. But a lot of them didn't have any military experience at all. And certainly I personally didn't have any who had been under really, really heavy combat, who'd ever taken a life, who'd ever tried to save a dying friend, who'd ever been ambushed, that kind of stuff. And to me, I would sit in these counselors' offices and just yell at them because to me, it was like, how are you supposed to understand? If you've never been there, how are you possibly supposed to understand what it's like and relate to me? But I found that to be a very false view, because once I took the time to understand these counselors and to do the work, I found that, they really do know what they're talking about. They really can be extremely helpful, and they really can help. But those are just a couple of the obstacles. The adrenaline seeking behavior, the desire to try and fix something, but I didn't know what I wanted to fix, or would get upset at people who didn't have combat experience when they tried to help me fix it, that kind of stuff. And then, of course, seeking employment and trying to figure out how to translate door kicker or, Marine grunts or whatever to civilian side and land jobs. There was a lot of things that were really frustrating that made me upset. And I think what I found is I felt like I was constantly carrying a sword and shield. I was always on guard. I was always a little bit angry, but I liked that because I used all that anger. I'd take it to the gym with me. I'd take it and I'd do stuff with it. So I enjoyed having a lot of powerful, angry, whatever emotion. And what I found in the long run is that you can still accomplish every bit as much without the negative emotion, without all the hard side effects and other stuff, So it's okay to put down the shield and the sword and seek help and do things the right way. You don't need to carry all of that extra weight with you just because you feel like it makes you more effective.
And that's a great point, David, is that I had actually seen, I was working with a veteran that, and I was a platoon sergeant. I was first sergeant in the Army, right? So anger, like you said, it was a tool that we sharpened and we honed. And this one particular service member, he's still active duty, And he was the guy, right? He was the guy that the first sergeant would wind up into anger and send him out into the company to wreck skulls. But after we started figuring, but he couldn't, and necessarily didn't turn that off, like you said, when he was driving or when he was at home or anything like that. But ultimately, once he figured out a way to control that, he became more effective as a leader than less effective. We have this idea that this anger, this tool that we have, it's a shillelagh or it's a club, right? But it's not a very finely tuned instrument. And once we actually learn how to manage that emotion, we can be more effective, not less effective.
Yeah, the aggression side of it also, I was an extremely aggressive person, which I found to be a good thing. If it was an argument, or back in the days when I liked to fight, if it was a fight, I wanted to be the most aggressive person. I wanted to do whatever. But I get along perfectly fine now, probably much better so without it. It's okay to let that stuff go, and you don't really, you don't need it. And especially, looking at being a recently married guy, I look at my life where I'm at now, recently married, in this relationship. If I hadn't done the work, if I hadn't solved those anger problems and those aggression problems, there's no way that I would be able to be as happy and as successful as I am and as good of a husband as I am in this relationship. So I'm very happy that I did the work to sort that stuff.
And that's what you're talking about, really. The part of the conceptualization that this is a series of is that lack of emotional control. That's not post-traumatic stress disorder. That's something entirely different. The family systems piece, which we're going to be talking about with Josh Krameyer going towards the end of the series here, that's something that's different, that's totally separate from post-traumatic stress disorder. And so just you talking about that helps other veterans to understand that there's a lot more to the total package of veteran mental health than just post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury. So for you, getting into what do you think is the stigma against veterans reaching out for help? And we're talking about the internal stigma. What makes us as veterans hesitant to reach out to talk to a mental health professional?
I think that varies a little bit because my view of how stigma worked was much different when I was first coming out of the Marines as an enlisted guy than it is now. Nowadays, I'm like, stigma, who cares? Like, I could care less what anybody thinks of me. If they think, he couldn't hack it or whatever. And not even just with combat stigma, with a lot of things. I put a lot less focus on other people's perceptions of me than I do on my focus on overall happiness and enjoyment in life. But I think that, especially coming out of the military, we didn't understand it in 2004, 2005 and stuff. People would be like, are you struggling from post-traumatic stress or blah, blah, blah. And we just laugh it off. It wasn't even, I'd almost say it wasn't even really a thing then. We didn't really understand it. We'd be like, I've heard of it, but that doesn't happen to us. That doesn't happen to me. So there was that kind of stigma around it. And then even after that, over time, it was definitely difficult for me to be the first person, at least outwardly from my unit, to go and say, hey guys, I'm talking to a counselor, I'm doing stuff, I'm trying to sort this stuff out. That was hard, when you're the first one doing it. The reason that I found it acceptable to admit that I was having problems and to talk other people into potentially seeking help as well is because when I was living in Manhattan Beach after getting out of the Marine Corps, I was out of the Marine Corps for about 2 years. I met a guy named Clay Hunt at a bar in Manhattan Beach one evening, and he was a fellow Marine, great guy. We had a good conversation and became close friends. But Clay would tell me all about his combat deployment. He would tell me about how he watched people killed in front of him. He would tell me about, sleeping in his bunkmate's bunk after his bunkmate was killed because he wanted to feel closer to him. He was so good at expressing himself and talking about stuff that I was like, how do you do that? How do you how do you talk about that like it's not a big deal? And he said, well, because when you talk about it, it's not a big deal. And I think that was really interesting to me. Clay was the first one who literally just crushed the stigma of it, who just owned his own transition, and was very forwardly active in doing what he needed to do in terms of going to counselors, seeking help, and everything else. So I think that helped a lot.
And I think that the demonstration of that's what we're used to in the military, right? Tell, show, do, right? Is how we used to learn stuff, and all the way basic training, boot camp, by the numbers, crawl, walk, run, and so having that to be demonstrated, actually somebody to have the courage to step out and take that step and say, yeah, I'm seeking mental health, whatever. I've said this pretty often, but it applies here. I'm a Jeep guy, right? So, Jeeps are like Legos for big guys, right? And bolt stuff on. So I've got, my Jeep is pretty recognizable. If people know me, they see my Jeep, they say, hey, that's Dwayne's Jeep. And when I was in active duty, it probably would have been more appropriate for my soldiers or my peers to see my Jeep sitting outside of a strip club or a bar than it would have been for me to be seen sitting outside the mental health clinic. Right, and there's something that's sort of skewed about that, in that me being happily married and being probably not the best place outside of a strip club, definitely not the best place out of a strip club for me. Whereas the mental health clinic is someplace that is beneficial. It's like being parked in front of the gym, only for your head. But so there's that, and we talk about that's the external stigma, but just that idea of other people are going to talk about me, or other people are going to say something about me. Until you get to the point like Clay did and demonstrated for you, is like, I don't give a crap. I'm to the point where this is hurting me or bothering me so much that it's not gonna, it's not gonna continue, because I can't let it continue. So I think that mentorship or that modeling was important for you.
Yeah, and I've found it to be almost an undeniable truth that veterans don't really feel that it's okay to seek help a lot of times until another veteran comes to them and says, hey, I've done it too. It was effective for me. It worked. I'm glad that I did it, and perhaps you should check it out. It's almost like we need permission from one another to, as you said, go to the gym for our heads, right? To go and get the do what we need to do for our mental health. And I find that really interesting. I completely understand it, coming from a grunt background where everything's kind of like, you need the approval of your peers in almost everything that you do. It's one of the most important things, right? But I'm not sure that I grasp still why it is that way for mental health. Because if civilians can come up to veterans all day long and say, hey, you should go to a clinic, you should speak to a counselor, it's just not going to work. It may sometimes, but I find it much more effective when a veteran goes to another veteran and says, hey, I've been there, I've done that, I got help, and as a result, I've never been happier, healthier, more successful, or an all-around better person. And then they're like, oh, all of a sudden the light bulb goes on and it's okay. I find that to be really interesting.
No, and that's exactly what we're trying to do with the podcast here, is saying, there's nothing wrong, and actually a whole heck of a lot right with going to talk to somebody and getting this stuff out of your head, to be able to have a more successful post-military life, employment, relationships. This is, and I'm talking about it all the time, but this is foundational. This is the foundational aspect for a successful life later on. Whereas this generation, I think you and I have talked about this generation has the potential, and I believe even the responsibility, to have an impact on this century that the greatest generation had on the last century. However, we also have the potential to be like the post-World War I generation and just kind of be lost and not really sure what's going on. And then there's the Roaring '20s and then the Depression. So, and we're sort of on these two diverging paths. and it's up to us which one to choose. And some of it is getting our headspace and timing right. Really, not to pump the show. So it's great to hear you say that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we have reached a point. We've been at war for so long now that there will soon be people retiring who spent their entire enlistment in service post 9/11. That's going to start happening soon. You know, it's really mind blowing to me. But that's just the way that it is. And as you said, our country, we are in probably the most desperate need of leadership that we've been in a very, very, very long time. And I have zero doubt whatsoever that veterans can come in and fill that role and put things together again and make things work, and bridge all of the divide that's been taking place. But in order to do that, they've got to be able to fix themselves first. You can't fix other people before you fix yourself. So my huge hope is that everyone who's coming home at least takes the time, chat it out, get checked out, do whatever, so that you can be the absolute best version of yourself. And then once you are, mentor other people, start a business, hire other veterans, run for office, whatever it is that you want to do. But it all starts with you first on the inside doing what you've got to do. Because it's so hard. Like I said in the beginning of this, there is zero chance that I would be able to have as successful and as happy of a marriage as I have now if I hadn't sorted this stuff out prior. I talk about everything with my wife, literally everything. Hide nothing from her. Any question she's got, I'll answer. And all of that is a result of it had to start somewhere. I had to start doing it with counselors and with other veterans and with other people. And it's one of those things that the more and the more you talk about it and go through it, the more it becomes not a big deal. It's now people ask me, hey, what happened? I started this podcast talking about how I shot a Marine. That took me a decade to get out.
Right.
Literally a decade. Now it comes out first thing on a podcast. Why? Because it's important, because it sets the tone for what we're talking about. It sets the tone for understanding why the stigma of mental health is a problem. So here's one thing that I didn't discuss. So not seeking help, all of that other stuff for quite some time. While I was a student at UC Berkeley, I put a loaded shotgun in my mouth and was quite serious about suicide. A lot of it is because I was numb. It's not because I was, oh, my life is so bad, I want to end it. I was just numb. I numbed myself to everything, had no feeling whatsoever. Not for other people, not for what happened to me, I was completely numb. And the reason that I was completely numb is I found that to be the best way to deal with all of the pain and all of the problems and all of the other stuff that I had buried for so long. And while you're in combat, you almost have to bury stuff. You do. You have to get over it, drive on with the mission, and keep moving forward. So you kind of have to put it away for a while. However, as soon as you are done, as soon as you are out of the military, you have a desire to go on to a police force or federal law enforcement or anything else. And even if you get a chance, a break in your military career to deal with it, you should take care of that stuff as soon as possible. The sooner that you deal with it, the lesser an effect that it will have. The less the termites will eat your house, right?
Right. And so in that very open and honest revelation, everybody thinks about veteran suicide as the problem. That's the problem we need to solve. And that's for you. If somebody were to say, David Smith he was suicidal, he must have PTSD. That's not a 1-to-1. That wasn't the reason why you went to commit suicide. Suicide is really a symptom of the broad range of spectrum of veteran mental health concerns. For you, it was much more emotional. For you, it was something that again, before we talked before, it was much more moral injury. And you had not, before you and I talked several months ago, you hadn't heard of that concept and what it was about and things like that. And so we, as a mental health professional community, are not doing a very good job helping veterans understand what's really going on. It goes back to what you had said at the very beginning, is we didn't understand it. We didn't know that this was actually a thing. If it's actually a thing, if it's actually a problem, hey, I know how to apply solutions to problems. But if I don't know what the problem is, I'll just throw any solution and hopefully it sticks. And so while, yes, suicide is a problem, it is an indicator to a deeper problem. And for you, it was much more emotional.
I would say, so I should have brought this up earlier, and I'm glad that you brought it up now. A huge part of stigma probably results from that we don't understand and we can't explain what's going on inside of us. So when people first started talking to me about post-traumatic stress, I was like, I don't really have post-traumatic stress. We fought, we shot plenty of rounds, we got shot at plenty, we were blown up, all that stuff, but none of it really struck me as like this, terrible traumatic experience. So it was hard for me to go anywhere and talk about, what was your traumatic experience? I didn't really have any. But when I started hearing these other parts of the puzzle, like moral injury, I didn't hear about moral injury until a year or 2 years ago. And when I heard that one, I was like, that fits. Okay, that one makes sense. And I think that a lot of times as veterans especially, it's very hard for us to seek help or to ask for help when we can't put a finger on what the hell's bothering us. How you don't, which is weird, because if something is wrong with your car that you can't explain, what's the first thing that you do? You take it to a mechanic and you ask the mechanic what sound is it making? And it vibrates and it's making this sound and it does this. And the mechanic's like, okay, I can help fix that. But for some reason with mental health, we feel like we shouldn't seek help until we can definitively explain what the symptoms are, what's going on, and we feel like we have to have the solution in hand before we go and talk to someone about what it is. But it's not that way. It literally is just like with a car or with plumbing or with anything else where, hey, I don't know what's going on. Water's all over the house. It's coming from the ceiling. It's coming from here and there. And I haven't figured out what it is, but I just know that something's wrong. So can you please come and help me sort it? That's the way that it should be, right? When you realize that stuff is going on, go find someone else who can help you unpack it, who can help you understand, and then slowly over time, they'll have maybe a model like you have that, sure, post-traumatic stress is this huge thing. Post-traumatic stress itself is huge. It's like it's almost like a banner, but so many different things fall underneath that what you have to do is connect people to something that hits more at home for them a lot of times. And then they're like, moral injury. Yeah, because it wasn't post-traumatic stress. I didn't mind being shot at. In fact, it was fun. Right. A lot of the combat was fun. But that part, about moral injury, how I shot a fellow Marine, and that's not supposed to happen, and it hurt me morally. It violated what I felt was supposed to be the code of ethos of military service and everything else. Yeah, that's the one. So I think you really hit on something clever there.
Well, and I think that, again, it's sort of something that's always been there, but it's not been in awareness. It's not been in awareness, I think, in the mental health community. Everybody's sort of seeing their piece, their prism, but they really don't see the whole aspect. And I like how you said that the veteran believes that they need to have the solution in hand when we really don't even know what the problem is, right? We don't define the problem. I've taken it to try to explain it like this, if my wife says she wants some flowers, right? She doesn't know what kind of flowers she wants, but she wants some flowers. And so I go to the store and I get her what I think are her favorite flowers. I bring them back. She says, I don't want those kind of flowers. I don't know what kind of flowers I want, but I know it's not those. So I keep going back and forth, and I empty the store of the flowers, and I keep coming back and say, well, are these the flowers you need? Same thing for veterans. Well, you need housing, right? No, it's not housing. Oh, you need employment, right? Oh, it's not employment? And so we keep coming back. The problem is not that I don't know how to to find the flowers, it's that the individual, that my wife in this case, doesn't know what flowers she wants, or she doesn't know what flowers she needs, because she's not able to define the problem.
Yeah. Another very important thing to discuss there is that a lot of times it's pretty much never a single problem. It's almost always compounded problems. So you have guys who are serving in the military who are responsible for leading young men into combat. They have so much responsibility, and they're respected, and they wear a cool uniform, and there's so much great stuff that goes with that. But then you leave the military and you struggle to find employment. You used to be this hardcore warfighter, and now you can't even support your family. So that eats away at you. Plus whatever it happens to be from combat maybe eats at you a little bit. And then you're not sure how to use the GI Bill and get to college, but you know that you need a college degree to get the types of jobs that you want. And so that eats at you a little bit. And then you find that you're not waking up at 6 a.m. and PTing every morning for 2 hours, and you're starting to get a little chubby around the midsection, and that eats at you a little bit. But the truth is there's all of these interconnecting organizations and ways to fix that. You can go to Team Red, White, and Blue, for instance, and get your physical fitness on. And you can go to Student Veterans of America and sort the GI Bill and all the educational issues. And you can go to another group and sort another piece of the puzzle, and on and on and on and on. And really it is like this huge puzzle once you get out of trying to put it together. And the more that you can figure out, okay, actually I need more pieces for this. Okay, I start putting this thing together, the more successful you'll be overall. There are a lot of people who get out and maybe they do have post-traumatic stress and whatever, but they manage to land themselves in a good job where they have sense of purpose, they have meaning, they like their coworkers. Other pieces of the puzzle are in place, and so it's not as dramatic as quickly as it can be for other people. Sure, they still need to go sort whatever, talk to the mental health counselors and everything else, but there's a lot of pieces in this puzzle. It's not just one thing here and one thing here.
And that is exactly right. That's what I talk about. A lot of people think that mental health is a secondary aspect of what we're dealing with. That's it's an additional thing. If the house of the veteran, that I've got the employment room, I've got the work and play room, and mental health is this shed that's out in the back that I go there if I need it, where it's actually the foundation upon which everything else is built. And that's the problem that I'm trying to solve, is to help people understand that the base that all of this is built on, if you have the crack of PTSD and TBI and substance abuse and emotion regulation and moral injury and so if the foundation is cracked in all of these different ways, then whatever you try to put on top of it is not going to be as stable or successful. Once you go to the mason and get the cracks fixed in the foundation, then you can start to build the house. And that's really, you explained it perfectly, how everything gets tied together, but mental health is the foundation of it all.
Yeah, that's perfectly accurate, I think. It's really important to understand that there are a lot of pieces of this puzzle. Another really, really important thing to discuss is that veterans are not a monolithic group. It's not one size fits all. You've got guys who served 20 years in the military who are getting out and trying to move into senior positions somewhere. You've got guys who served 4 years in the military but were in lots of combats and are not married and something else. And then you've got guys who served X amount of time and they are married. So it's not the same. Every veteran leaving service is generally different in some ways. Like we're not the same across the board. So each individual veteran needs to go out and needs to take the responsibility upon themselves. So this is another huge thing. I know that as veterans we get so much, and sometimes there's I hate to say there can be this like entitlement mentality, people are not supposed to just take care of you when you leave the military. It is your responsibility to take care of yourself. And that includes everything that I discussed, the physical fitness, the employment, the GI Bill education, and everything else, the mental health. You have to take responsibility for these things and fix all of your foundational pieces. There are people out there who will help you, who are experts in the field to come and help you fix those different parts of your foundation, but they're not really going to come to you. You have to go out and you have to say, hey, I need help with this piece of my foundation. I need help with this piece. I need help with this piece. And it's very possible that there's stigma for all of these pieces. I got out of the military and I didn't want to seek help for figuring out how to use the GI Bill. As stupid as that sounds, I was like, no, I should be able to figure this out on my own. Like, I should be completely able to go to a brick and mortar school and write my college applications and do all this stuff. Man, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. It was not that much different than mental health. I had to reach out to friends, and then friends connected me to resources, and then I used those resources to eventually become successful. Like I said, I went to a decent school. I managed to graduate from Berkeley, but it's all because I said, after trying to do it myself for entirely too long, I said, okay, you're right. I don't want to do this online school stuff anymore. I want to go to a real school. I want to use the GI Bill the right way, and then I want to transfer to a UC. And once I took the responsibility and said, these are my goals and this is what I want to do, and I started seeking people to help me, then it was easy. But for some reason, coming out of the military, I felt like, oh, I should know exactly how to use the GI Bill. I shouldn't.
Yeah,
not a chance.
And that's what I hear a lot. Guys are like, well, I should be able to handle this, and and who made up the rules? Who said that was the way it's supposed to be? And I like how you said that. We do think we can handle stuff on our own. I'm picking up a couch. Hey, do you want help with that? No, I'm good. And then I throw my back out or whatever it is, right? And so in whether that's the I can do it mentality or never quit. I mean, that's that warrior ethos piece might play into me not reaching out for help and help in this context and where conversation is definitely mental health help, but also just any kind of help, and I'm here running a podcast and I'm not doing it on my own. I've got, people helping me, what do I need to do with the podcast, and I'm listening to stuff, and I'm going out and I'm seeking more information. But I really like how you put that. You first became aware that you needed to change, right? That you were aware that I'm getting nowhere. I'm spinning my tires, on this college thing. But after awareness came action, and that's when change happened. So just being aware of the problem isn't enough. That's what we're doing here. People listen to this. Okay, now I'm aware of the problem. Then what? Then what is what you said. This veteran has to take responsibility to take action.
Yeah. One real quick thing I want to make note of is that there is a huge difference between that military/combat mentality that we need and the you're not in the military/combat anymore mentality. Look, if I'm in combat, we're under fire, Marines are pinned down on a beach, and I need to pick up a stick and attack a machine gun position, I will pick up a stick and attack a machine gun position, right? I will get MacGyver to do whatever it takes and sort that stuff on my own, and I'll make stuff happen. That's completely different. The problem is that we try and take that I can do anything, I'll solve it, I'll figure it out mentality from the military. We try and take that and then put it into our civilian lives. It's not the same. That is not apples to apples. That's apples to like cucumber or something. It's not even in the same in the same group. It's so completely different, because when you get out, right, you shouldn't be doing that. You should not be like, oh yeah, I need to solve my GI Bill, and if I have to pick up a stick to solve my GI Bill, then I'll solve my GI Bill. Nope. No. It doesn't work that way anymore outside of combat / the military, right? You're out. There are tons of resources. Tons of people have been there and done this before. It's not like this, life or death scenario. So go out, reach out for help, find all the stuff that you need and get it done. I hope that makes sense.
No, it does.
It's
and David, I know that we can go on this for hours and hours, but that makes me think of something when we were in the military. All of that, all of the extra support stuff was provided for us. Afghanistan, my first Afghanistan, we were doing security escort, 150 miles, I think, 151 one way. So when we were out on the most dangerous routes, of course, I had, 8, 10, 12 trucks with me securing local national vehicles. So I had my team in front, behind. I had everybody in my truck. But I had Apaches and helicopters right above me, like literally almost landing on top of my truck. And then we had drones above them. And we had F-16s above them. And we had, stratosphere. So I had coverage from the ground to the edge of space. And then I had battle space owners. I had, traveling through the battle space. I had Overwatch guys passing me through checkpoints. I had, coverage of fire, and so there were all of these different resources that had I needed them, I just had to push a different button or use a different call sign, and I could reach out and get the assistance. And it wasn't that much different from veterans that I've talked to, that were going door to door, and all you had to do was call and then somebody would be there. But we don't put that in place for ourselves when we leave the military, even though we have coverage from ground to stratosphere, left to right in all directions.
Which is crazy. I mean, if you are a grunt, you're kicking in a door. You've got gun trucks that are blocking all of the positions around you. You've got all the same stuff. You've got air, you've got support, you've got an ODA or some other asset on call somewhere. You've got QRF, you've got geospatial reconnaissance, you've got, name it, all the support that you can imagine. 9 times out of 10, you don't have even the slightest idea of how much stuff is there to support you, but it's there. As you said, based by zone or by whatever, but all that stuff is there. And we feel like, oh yeah, it's me, I should be able to do this all on my own. And as you said, even in the military, there are so many layers of cover. For some reason, we don't think about it that way. We have that, like, I should be able to do it on my own, suck it up, get through it mentality. And I think a lot of people are blinded by how much support there is in the military, how much goes on to make even the small missions possible. And they're definitely blinded when they get out by how much it takes to be successful in the civilian world. You need all of that same amount of support. Say the Apaches is your GI Bill educational services or whatever, and say that the stratosphere level is something else. Whatever it happens to be, it's literally the same. And so one thing that we really need to do is to start bringing all of these resources into one place so that it's easy to find, locate, and make use of resources. I know that there's something called the Warrior Wellness Alliance, which is pretty new. And that's done through the Bush Center and some other organizations. And what they're doing is putting everything in one place so that you can search keyword. You can search post-traumatic stress or fitness or GI Bill or whatever. And then you'll get populated, 20, 30, 40 different types of websites. You find what fits for you. Maybe the educational resources that you need are very different from the educational resources that I need, but at least you have the list there. You go through, you find out what you need, you find out what the scholarship programs are, what the fitness programs are, what the mental health services are, etc., and then you make use of them. And then the cool part of having an alliance is that once you start doing these, for instance, you join up with, let's say, Team Rubicon, and you're finding your sense of purpose again with international disaster response, and then you realize, oh, Team Red, White, and Blue works a lot with these guys too, and they do physical fitness. Cool, and then you do stuff with them. And then they're interconnected with the Student Veterans of America, so you learn about using the GI Bill. All of these things, this idea of an alliance, of everything being interconnected so that you are passed from one resource to another, to another, to another, is finally starting to happen. But it's still going to take responsibility on behalf of the veteran to go out and seek those. Nobody's going to come and knock on your door and say, hey Dave, I see that you just got out of the military and now you live in this place and hey, would you like a job, and would you like this, and would you like this? I mean, sort of. There will be people there to kind of help you, but it still all comes down to you, and that you're going to have to take all of the responsibility to leverage those resources, to find those resources and everything else.
That's a great description of maybe a collaborative solution, but also, David, that's a solution of what we're trying to do here on the Change Your POV Podcast Network. We have all of these shows to do exactly what you said earlier, which is to have a veteran say, hey, it's okay for you to go to that place, or it is okay for you to do that and do that place. And so even though all of those resources are out there in this great big open square, a veteran's just not going to stand there until he says, is it okay for me to do that? And so that's what we see we're doing here on the network, is to be able to say, look, it's all right. This is what you can do. And again, exactly what you said, if you don't do it, you're not going to be as successful as you could be.
Yeah. I see that you got the book Tribe by Sebastian Junger behind you. And in the book, Sebastian's talking about, what it means to be part of a tribe, to be part of a collective group, and why the military affects us the way it does, and why we so much miss the camaraderie that we have in the military, and why we miss that sense of purpose, and how we feel so lost when we leave the military with that interconnected sense of purpose and camaraderie and everything. And so people need to realize that when you get out, there's a lot of things that you're going to miss about the military. However, if you pay attention to these podcasts, and if you search for the resources, and if you do the other stuff, if you do the work and take the responsibility, you can build a tribe again outside of the military. I would dare to say that my tribe now outside of the military is perhaps even larger and even stronger than it was in the military. And that's saying a lot, because I love with my entire heart all the guys that I served in combat with. And that goes to say a lot about what I've managed to piece together since leaving the military. And everyone can do the same. I mean, all of the veterans who are transitioning, everybody who's worn the uniform, who's had the boots on the ground, is there to help you along the journey. And all of the guys who have been out for a while and are still struggling, guess what? It's time to say, okay, hey, yes, perhaps help me a little bit with this. Help me get my finances in order, my GI Bill in order, my whatever it happens to be, because there are people all over who are just dying to help you out. There is an entire tribe outside of the military, and I highly suggest that anyone who's listening to this starts piecing that together.
No, that's absolutely it, and to just really hammer that home, it's the same thing for me, David. Is that the network, and that's what the buzzword now, but the tribe that we have built now is stronger in many different ways than even what we had when we were in the military, and that's the same thing for me too. If I hadn't really paid attention to my mental health and wellness, I wouldn't be as successful as I could be to turn around and help our brothers and sisters out. So if somebody wanted to reach out and contact you, what would be a good way for them to do that? Maybe social media, stuff like that?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's linkedin.com/in/DaveSmith0311. Hey, if you need anything, you can send me an email, david.julian.smith@gmail.com. Julian is spelled Julian. Anyway, reach out to Dwayne. Dwayne also knows how to get in touch with me.
Yeah, now make sure that we have all that on the show notes, and we'll be getting that out. And I really appreciate you taking the time to be, not just be on the podcast here. The amount of time that veterans want to spend serving other veterans. I once heard, and it probably was on a podcast, that I heard that a Marine has 5 minutes on the beachhead of another Marine's soul, right? That no matter what, if you're an old school leatherneck or a brand new recruit, you've got 5 minutes with another veteran to say, hey, what can I do for you? And often, if it's worth it, you have more than 5 minutes. So I appreciate you giving an hour of the time, not just for me, but for our listeners. And thanks for being part of this whole conceptualization series. I think it really kind of brings it in well.
Absolutely. I want to make one super quick recap. 4 years ago, in 2013, I was standing in the bedroom of my college apartment with a shotgun in my mouth because I failed to take responsibility for my transition. As I said now, 2017, I live in Norway with a woman that I love. I work a job that I love. My life has never been better. I'm actually in better physical shape than I was in the Marines, and I was in pretty excellent physical shape in the Marines. My mental health is better than I ever thought it could be. And there are things that are happening in my life now that I never even fathomed to be possible. And all of those are because I made use of resources and I made a decision to make this life everything that I possibly thought it could be and then some. And so I highly suggest anyone that's listening to really take this to heart and make use of the resources. You don't have to wait until it gets bad. Do it now.
You know, a mic drop is sort of a visual kind of thing. I wish there was some way, just this big bam, right? Bam, mic drop. No, that was great. That was a great recap, David, and I appreciate your time, and we'll definitely have to have you come back on the show because we only just scratched the surface. So thanks for what you're doing, brother.
Thanks, Wayne.
Hard work, hard work. Hard work, hard work. Hard work.
So that was a great episode with David Smith talking about the internal stigma that keeps veterans from seeking veteran mental health.
Say, hard work, earn my pay. Hard work.
You can find the show notes on this show and many of the things we talked about at either changeyourpov.com or veteranmentalhealth.com, looking for episode HST026.
Hard work, another day's work. Hard work.
This is the second episode of the Veteran Mental Health Boot Camp, a series brought to you by the Change Your POV Podcast Network and the Headspace and Timing Podcast.
Got to go make the call. Hard work, banging on the doors in the morning. Hard work.
If you're a veteran or service member, the family member of one, or support veterans in any way, then this series is designed to help you understand more about veteran mental health.
Hard work, manifest. Hard work, you gotta do it right. Hard work, here we go.
If you're just now getting into the series, go back and check out episode HST025, where we introduce the concept of looking beyond PTSD and TBI in regards to veteran mental health.
Work, we're moving on out. Hard work, we gotta go and do the job. Hard work, load 'em up on the airplane. Hard work, in the early morning rain. Hard work.
Make sure you subscribe to the Change Your POV Podcast Network on your podcast player of choice and sign up for updates at changeyourpov.com and veteranmentalhealth.com.
Hard work, everybody on the plane. Hard work, sit 'em on down. Hard work.
We would love to hear your feedback regarding this series and all of the shows in the Change Your POV Podcast Network. You can do so by visiting our Facebook group, leaving a comment or review on iTunes.
Hard work, I earn my pay. Hard work, we're on the hard work.
Remember, veteran mental health and wellness is the basis of a successful post-military life, and one that all who answered our nation's call to serve deserves. Remember, brothers and sisters, you're not alone. Ever.